Kona. It's another glorious day, Sunday, Palm Sunday. The skies are blue, and we are still all in one piece after that big 5.3 earthquake last night. Who felt the earthquake? Yeah. I think everybody, exactly. Well, welcome to Unity of Kona. We're so glad you're here today, and to get us started, we're going to stand. Oh, wait. Is there a question? Oh, she's a little behind, answering that she heard about the earthquake last week. Oh. I shouldn't stump you guys like this. Sorry about that. A little bit too much license at the platform. We are going to stand, and we're all going to sing Stand Together after we do our affirmation. Thank you, Patrick, in the front row. So, if you'll all say it with me together. I have the strength to accomplish all that is mine to do. And ours to do right now is sing. So let's sing. And I would like to now invite you to visualize the sanctuary as a big heart. Feel all the loving energy of those who are around you, and that energy flowing in and through you. And throughout every element of this sanctuary, all the way to the back of the church where ordinarily Kayla and the children would be. And if there are any circumstances or people in your life in need of prayer, I invite you to hold them in your heart as together we say the prayer for protection. The light of God surrounds us. I am the light of God. The love of God enfolds us. I am the love of God. The power of God protects us. I am the power of God. The presence of God watches over us. I am the presence of God. Wherever I am, God is, and all is well.
I'm blessed to be with you this morning. The kids had a great sleepover, so they're not here this morning, which is fine. I'm glad that they're happy, and then that means that I get to join you. So today, I'm going to be reading for Sunday 14th, 2019. The word of the day is hope. It says, the gospel tells a story of Jesus entering Jerusalem riding on a donkey, welcomed by crowds spreading palm branches and even their cloaks in his path. His followers found hope of liberation from oppression. Today, a new order of things begins in my life. Like the crowds welcoming Jesus with shouts of Hosanna, I welcome a renewed awareness of I am my Christ nature. In this awareness, my hope of release from liberation is realized. The Spirit of God dwells in me, and I am made perfect. Anchored in spiritual peace, wisdom, wholeness, abundance, and harmony, I am grateful for my ever-expanding realization of God as my source. For God alone, my soul waits in silence, for my hope is from Him. Psalm 62:5. So our affirmation today, I'll read it and then we'll do it together. The Spirit of God dwells in me, and I am made perfect. Together, the Spirit of God dwells in me, and I am made perfect. Thank you.
Now we'll sing our meditation song.
Be a light for all to see. The hope is
will choose kindness. I will choose peace in every word I say. I will choose love. I will choose honor. The divine in everything that comes my way. Each and every day, I will choose love.
Good morning. How delightful to be back in this wonderful community. As we stand here on this glorious Palm Sunday, let's take a deep breath together and center ourselves in that Christ presence that we honor today especially. And we honor it not only in a story about what illustrates life over 2,000 years ago. We honor the Christ presence in our own being. So breathe into that center space, your heart, and know that it is that Christ nature that allows us to take on the mantle of perfection that our daily word message spoke about today. We are made perfect. We are whole. We are healthy. We are in harmony with all that is. And so we let slide away that human part of our nature that wants to give us a message of anything other than our perfection. And we stand, sit, immerse ourselves in the wholeness of truth, in the presence of God, in our own divine nature. And we breathe into that for a moment of settling into that truth in our heart. Divine nature is my nature. And I experience the full expression of the Christ in me as wholeness, perfection, freedom. Thank you, God. So it is. For 19 years, I lived with a physicist, and his life was driven by asking the right questions. Now, very early on in our getting acquainted, after meeting on a blind date, I made clear that I had a very deep and rich spiritual life. I was doing the dance of what I call woo-woo, metaphysics. I'd left the church of my childhood and had stumbled upon this realm that nobody talked about in the Presbyterian church where I grew up. And I had begun a deep exploration of many topics metaphysical, and had found a personal credo, a spiritual process and a path that was very important to me. It was pretty individualized. I had spiritual partners, but here this guy came into my life. And he defined himself as an agnostic. And one of the things he was fond of saying was, I'm not sure whether or not there's a God is the right question to ask. He who is all about the right questions. So we began exploring life together, and he's not the only one that had questions. Jesus had a way of directing us with affirmative statements this isn't so much a question, but it speaks to this idea of where are we headed and how will we get there, and offered us tools to begin our journey. This verse, you probably know it well. Ask and the gift is yours. Seek and you will discover. Knock and the door will be opened for you. This particular version comes from the Passion Translation. Now, let's kind of pull it apart a little metaphysically, because when we use the word ask in our contemporary culture, we often mean gimme, gimme. Or we're pleading for something, especially if it's God. Can I have this now, please? And Jesus' meaning, when he says ask, is really declare. Determine who you are, what you will be, and how you will live when you ask. Declare. Set your intention. Call the universe to bring you that which you desire. Seek. It's not so much the search for something out there in the unknown. What Jesus meant for us to seek in our inner vision, this declaration, this intention that we have made, and to put energy around it, to clothe it with our emotional response to this intention, to become that seeking missile, if you will, that guided energy that is focused on that intention, so that we hone in where we are headed in life. And then to knock, so that we receive, so that we stand at the door of heaven and present ourselves willing, receptive, and able to receive the gift that we have declared, that we have intended and imagined, and now we stand ready and available for it to arrive in our life. So I have a question in the spirit of having the right questions guide our life. I have one for you. Where am I? Does that question pop up for you? Maybe it shows up a little bit more in the form of, how'd I get here? Where am I? And here's a helpful tool for you to determine. I like visual tools. A line. Are you above the line? Or are you below the line? Oh, come on now, this is the audience participation piece. Are you above the line? Or are you below the line? And you're saying, what's the line about? And I'm having fun because now somebody's out there in the audience saying, oh my God, I have to say publicly, I have to raise my hand. What if I get it wrong? And in front of all these people, or if I get it wrong, she's going to call me out and then I'll really be embarrassed. I don't know what to do. We stymie ourselves. But the line is simply a recognition of the two pieces of consciousness that we dance between in our experience of living. Many of us know about this little guy. Swelled balloon head. That's the ego. The human self. The thing that wants control because it wants what it wants, and when it wants it now, and is often the place from which we do not make our most wise choices. And so above the line might look like that. When we transcend the limitations of our human thinking and expand our mind into the consciousness of God, where we live and move from that Christ presence within us. So, there's some possibilities for above and below the line. Let's just run a little test on where we are. If I'm above the line in that higher consciousness, I react to life and to circumstances from my vulnerability, from my willingness to be available to what shows up. Not getting tangled up in right or wrong about a circumstance, but what wants to be birthed in this situation? What wants to come to life through me in this moment? To be available and open. That receptivity of being able to stand at the door of heaven, and when you knock, know that you will receive the gift. So we've got the other side, if we're standing in the light above the line, and when the shadow, the ego comes, what's the opposite of vulnerable? What kind of qualities are below the line as an opposite of available and open? Again, audience participation part, just shout some things out for me. Defensive, closed. Yes. Fearful. Oh, yeah. That below the line stuff always arises out of the place that's fearful in us. Well, I just chose closed because there are so many good opportunities for what we express when we're below the line. Let's try another one. Oh. Now, I know nobody in this room has a desire to be controlling about everything and everyone. So we'll have to imagine if you were controlling what that would be like, that you've got a tight grip on everything. But what would be the opposite? Allowing. Ooh, that's a good one. I haven't heard that one. Open, allowing. I choose open to infinite possibilities. Rather than saying from the ego, because I've been known to tell God, I know what should be happening here. I know what I want. Don't be confusing me with intuition. No, I've already decided. Otherwise, can I be open to all that might show up when I release my need to control? The higher consciousness place. And we're also curious from this place of our higher consciousness. When we have the possibility, when we have the capability to be in wonder about life, openly curious, then we can also be non-reactive to the things that just might trigger our ego. We can develop that ability to not have the ego need to control if we can say, I wonder what, fill in the blank. I wonder what the universe might bring, to revisit that thought from my January message. I wonder how God is going to turn this around in ways I haven't seen up to this moment. Socrates is attributed with the statement, wisdom begins with wonder. So just sort of say the phrase, I wonder, to yourself. Does it open space a little? So the next time you're confronted with something, I wonder how, I wonder what. But what would the opposite be? Because, that ego, it does show up. Exactly, the I know everything voice, yes. And one of my favorite phrases, don't confuse me with the facts. Yeah. Defensive. Because we know, and don't confuse me, is the territory of I've already decided and planted my feet, put the stake in the ground. But if we're in the ego and we are committed to being right, no matter what's going on, again, don't confuse me with the facts, we are limiting ourselves and the possibilities. So what would be the opposite of committed to being right? Territory I know fairly well. Now somebody I know has the experience of the opposite of committed to being right. How about committed to being willing to learn, to being willing to learning, to be in that space of I wonder to see what comes. So life can flow either out of our ego and the questions that it prompts, which may not be so useful, because usually it's a statement, it would have statements about, I already know. Just go away and leave me alone. I'm quite happy. I have control of things. Don't you worry just a bit. As opposed to the higher consciousness, which is that expansion of connection to God and our openness to see possibilities and to learn something new as we do this walk of life. Mr. Einstein, who I'm sure now, the husband I mentioned at the beginning, after 19 years, he went off to dance in the cosmos, and I'm sure he regularly has coffee with Dr. Einstein. Or I'm sure he would, if that's a possibility, in what comes next. That would be right at the top of his list. Albert said, if I had an hour to solve a problem and my life depended on it, I would use the first 55 minutes considering the proper questions to ask. So invest yourself in that God consciousness that is filled with wonder so that you can move life from that space rather from that ego that is defensive and controlling. Now, I wonder what kind of experience Jesus was having on Palm Sunday. Imagine the crowds waving their palm fronds and laying them on the ground along with their clothing to come into the city in triumph. And yet he already knew what the experience was. And can you imagine him in the garden after the Last Supper with the disciples, in the garden where he went to pray, to find that deep connection with his Father, Abba, as it's recorded, he referred to him, which more or less translates to Papa or Daddy. That deep, intimate relationship he had with God. He needed that connection because what was on his heart in the middle of that experience was, we might phrase it, really, God? Why? Why me? Why is this the journey I'm having? And what he ultimately said after that process with prayer is, I'd rather not have this cup of sorrow, but I follow your will, not my own. He stood in the presence of wonder, and he also knew that the triumph would be found at the end of the journey, what we mark next week as the resurrection. That there would be much pain and sorrow along the way. And yet he stood in the possibilities of knowing the truth of who he was and that his path held ultimate good. Not only for himself, but he was the example for each of us to stand in the face of life's challenges and difficulties and be in that space of higher consciousness, of holding the truth of who we are and releasing the ego that says, I've got it all figured out and it has to be my way, and claiming that Christ experience. What would it be like if that's the choice you were able to make? A number of years ago, when I was an employee at Unity Church of Hawaii, this was 2015, three of us who were associate ministers under Reverend Sky St. John, under contract, our contracts came to a conclusion. And what we knew in the aftermath of Sky's passing is that everything would change in our church. And certainly one of those changes was the three of us were not renewed to continue our work as employees. So imagine sitting in a room with board members you're having your exit interview, And you know that you have been doing the work that is your life's work to do. And then here it appears it's evaporating. It's going away. And imagine having a channel twirling in the back of your mind that says to you, audibly, as though there's a voice at your shoulder, well, if this is today's outcome, I wonder what God has planned next. Boy, it must be a howdy-do. Now, I was grieving that change and that shift in my experience, but I could still hold the thought of, I wonder what comes next if this is the experience in this moment. Well, what came next? Sometimes when life turns upside down, you might be lucky enough to have an experience of being called down under. And 2 days later, I got a phone call and a request to go to Melbourne, Australia, and work with a group there who wanted to start a new Unity church. And so we launched the first new Unity community in Australia in, I think, 20 years. And I got to spend 3 months working with enthusiastic, committed people, moving the Unity movement forward in that area, which couldn't have happened. I mean, it only happened because the person who invited me knew what my situation was, and now I might be available. And then other things happened when I came home from Australia, because I could stay in that consciousness of curiosity, open to possibilities, vulnerable even to my sorrow and pain of having the loss that I had experienced. But if we hold that loss, sorrow, pain, difficulty, if we hold it lightly and count on the wisdom that begins with wonder to show up, guide our life, then we are moving in a Christ-like experience. We are finding our journey of perfection. And so I invite you all to look for the questions that open wonder, open expansiveness, and allow you to receive the gift when you knock at the door of heaven. Mahalo.